Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. You know how much we love to get into the meat of things here. And, well, today's topic is no exception.
Absolutely.
We're going deep into this idea of Christian faith, what it actually means to have courage to live it out, and really what this whole idea of mission is all about.
Right.
We've got a thought-provoking piece to guide us here, Michael Ramsden's Christ, Courage, and Finishing the Mission. We're going to unpack what it really means to live out your faith in a world that can sometimes feel pretty hostile, and dive into what kind of courage that really takes.
It's not always easy.
It's not.
And Ramsden doesn't shy away from that.
He doesn't.
He's pulling from all these amazing examples,
Right.
Not just these stories from history, but also like these foundational texts from the Bible, like the book of Hebrews, parts of John's gospel.
Right.
But then he also brings in stuff that's happening right now, even referencing this email he got about Christians being kidnapped.
Mm-hmm.
And it just really makes you think about how these ancient ideas, they're still playing out today. It's not just, old dusty history.
No. Let's start with this whole concept of mission, because that's really at the heart of it.
It is?
And he really digs into this in Hebrews chapter 11. And I think most people who have spent any time in church are probably familiar with this chapter, sometimes called the Hall of Fame of Faith,
Yeah.
You read through it and it's like, wow, all these giants of the faith, Gideon, Barak, Samson, and so many others, they did some incredible things. They conquered kingdoms. They brought about justice. They saw miracles, all these amazing acts of faith that led to real impact in the world.
Right.
But then it kind of throws you for a loop, doesn't it?
It does.
Mm-hmm.
There's this real tension that the author brings out. On the one hand, you've got these victories, right? But then right alongside them is this long list of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
People being tortured, mocked, imprisoned, even stoned.
Yeah.
And these aren't just random people. These are the same individuals who are commended for their incredible faith.
Yeah.
It really makes you reconsider, doesn't it? This idea that, well, if you have enough faith, life's going to be easy.
Right. It challenges that prosperity gospel kind of thinking.
Yeah. It's saying, look, faith isn't some guarantee of earthly comfort or success.
Yeah.
It's about something much deeper.
And this is where it really gets interesting. The author points out that even though these individuals had this radical faith, they did not receive what was promised, at least not in their lifetimes. It's like these individual missions, however huge they were just pieces of something much bigger, something that's still going on. Like we're part of this larger story that's still unfolding. It really makes you think about where you fit into the bigger picture, right?
It does.
Hebrews 11 kind of leaves you with this feeling that, yeah, faith can lead to these amazing breakthroughs, but it also doesn't shield you from suffering.
Exactly.
And that both are part of this bigger mission.
And I think that brings us to why this isn't just some ancient history lesson.
Yeah.
This is relevant to what's going on in the world right now.
Yeah.
And that email about the kidnapping in Peshawar, it really drives that point home.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it, that the same kinds of challenges that people faced back then are still happening today. Christians being persecuted, even killed for their faith. It's a reality for so many people around the world right now.
Right. And I think the author touches on something really important when he talks about how easy it can be, especially for those of us living in the West, to just become numb to news like that.
Yeah.
It's like we see so much suffering in the news all the time that it's almost like, well, what can you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of detachment, it's dangerous, I think, because it allows us to just ignore these very real challenges that our brothers and sisters are facing. It's like we're trying to distance ourselves from the reality of what it means to follow Jesus in a world that doesn't always welcome him.
Yeah. And I think that leads directly into what the author calls the costly calling.
Yeah.
And he really leans on Jesus's words in John chapter 16, where he's preparing his disciples for what's coming. And I mean, it's pretty blunt. They'll put you out of the synagogues, Jesus says. Indeed, the hour is coming when whoever kills you will think that he is offering service to God. And I think that's a pretty sobering thought, isn't it, for anyone who follows Jesus?
It is. And what's interesting for me is this connection he makes between the Greek word for witness, which is martyrs, and how we use the word martyr today.
Right.
In the Bible, it's not about seeking recognition through your sacrifice, right? It's not about, wanting to be a martyr for the fame of it or something.
Right.
It's more about this willingness to suffer as you proclaim the truth of who Jesus is and what he's done. And the promise that Jesus gives is crystal clear. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you.
Yeah. And that's a far cry from the message you sometimes hear, isn't it? About how following Jesus is going to bring you comfort and success and, an easy life. This material, I think, paints a much more complete picture. Yeah, you might see incredible breakthroughs,
Right.
but there's also this potential for profound suffering. It's like, can you really assume that you can live out your faith and it's not going to cost you anything?
Yeah. The author really challenges you on that, doesn't he? He makes the point that, look, when you say yes to what you believe is a divine call, it might mean taking real risks.
Yeah.
And the original apostles, they definitely understood that.
Yep.
They were beaten, imprisoned, many of them were eventually killed. For them, refusing to share the gospel because it was hard or dangerous, it just wouldn't have made any sense.
Right. And then you have this really powerful image in Hebrews 12, the great cloud of witnesses, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just like a handful of inspiring stories. It's this massive community of countless believers who've gone before us. They ran their race. They faced incredible difficulties, but they kept their eyes on Jesus.
And I think the message for us is pretty clear. We need to draw strength from their example, let go of the things that are holding us back, and run our own race with the same perseverance.
Yeah. But the author then kind of shifts gears a little bit. He starts talking about why this courageous commitment to the Christian mission might be fading, particularly in the West. And he really hones in on two reasons: this weakening of conviction, and then what he calls a marriage of convenience. Let's start with this idea of a loss of conviction, because I think this is something that a lot of people are wrestling with today.
Right. And the first aspect he brings up is being defeated by philosophy.
Okay.
There's this line of thinking that says faith and truth, they belong in totally separate categories. Faith is just personal preference, not something rooted in reality. So it's like, yeah, I believe this, but it has nothing to do with what's actually true about the world.
Right.
And this kind of thinking, it reduces Christianity to just a private matter, something that has no real bearing on how you live your life or how you interact with the world around you. But the author is pushing back hard on that idea.
Yeah.
He goes back to the biblical understanding of pistis, which is the Greek word for faith, and explains that it's actually about trust in what is real and true. And those things, they have moral consequences. They impact how you live. So when we talk about faith, we're not talking about some blind leap into the dark.
Right.
We're talking about a reasoned trust in the reality of God and who he is.
Yeah, and he uses this really helpful analogy about having faith in the American government. It's not just hoping that it exists somewhere out there. Yeah.
You're acknowledging that it's real, and you're trusting that it's going to do what it's supposed to do. And he ties that directly back to Hebrews 11:6, which says that faith requires believing that God exists and that he rewards those who seek him.
Exactly. Christian faith is anchored in the historical events of Christ, his life, his death, his resurrection. Those things actually happened in history, and that matters. It's not some vague, ethereal idea.
Yeah. And then the second part of this loss of conviction that he talks about is being subdued by science. This fear that as science advances, it's squeezing God out of the picture. It's like the more we understand about the universe, the less we need God to explain things. It's that whole God of the gaps idea, right?
Right. And it's a common objection, right?
Yeah.
But the author addresses this head on. He basically says, look, just because we understand how something works, it doesn't mean there's no one behind it, right?
Right.
Think about it like this. If you know the recipe for a cake, that doesn't tell you who baked it. Right. You need both the recipe, the how-to, and the baker, the one who actually made it.
And in the same way, understanding the scientific principles of the universe doesn't rule out the possibility of a divine mind behind it all.
Right. And he tackles that whole objection that miracles violate natural laws with that example of the book being thrown and stopping in midair. It's like, okay, that wouldn't be a violation of gravity. It would be evidence of another force acting on that book.
Right, right. And what's really key for us to grasp is that the laws of nature, the fact that they're consistent, is actually what allows us to recognize when something out of the ordinary happens, when there might be some kind of divine intervention.
Yeah, and he uses that C.S. Lewis analogy, the one about the stolen money.
Right. It's like, if you know the normal rules of how money works, then you can tell when someone has cheated or broken those rules.
Yeah. So the point is that neither science nor philosophy can actually disprove the core beliefs of Christianity.
Exactly.
But, the author doesn't just leave it there. He challenges Christians to really engage with these questions, not to shy away from them, but to address them with gentleness and respect, just like it says in 1 Peter 3:15 and 16.
Right.
And And he stresses how vital it is for the church to be part of these public conversations, to really engage in the marketplace of ideas rather than retreating from it. Now let's shift to that second reason he gives for this kind of waning commitment to the mission. What he calls this marriage of convenience. And I think this one really forces us to look inward, doesn't it?
It does. And to understand this, he brings in John Gray's perspective, the philosopher, from his book Straw Dogs. And Gray, he's not a Christian, but he makes this fascinating argument that humanism, this worldview that's so dominant in the West today, it's actually a secularized version of Christianity.
Oh.
It's like we've taken the Christian ideas about salvation and purpose, this longing for a better world, and we've just stripped God out of the equation. So instead of God bringing about this transformation, this redemption, we're putting our faith in human progress and our ability to create this utopia through science, technology, social change. It's like we still want the same outcome that Christianity offers, but we're trying to achieve it without God.
Yeah. So Gray sees humanism's belief in progress and this idea of creating a perfect world. It's almost like a direct replacement for the Christian concept of salvation and God's ultimate plan for humanity.
Right. It's like we've taken the Christian blueprint, but we've removed the architect.
Yeah.
And yet we still expect the building to go up.
Right. It's like taking the recipe for the cake but trying to bake it without the oven.
Right. But then Gray takes it a step further. He says, hold on a minute, maybe this whole biblical idea of the fall of man, maybe that actually gives you a more accurate picture of human nature than this optimistic view that humanism offers. He's not saying that humans are inherently evil or anything like that. What he's saying is that simply gaining knowledge, it doesn't automatically make us better people. He even draws on Darwin's ideas about evolution, suggesting that humans were driven by what helps us survive and reproduce.
Right.
Not necessarily by some innate desire for truth. And this is where it gets really interesting. He even hints that, sometimes deceiving ourselves, believing things that aren't true, it might actually give us an advantage in the evolutionary race.
Yeah.
It's kind of a bleak view of human nature.
It is.
And from this, Gray draws some pretty serious conclusions. He argues that rejecting the idea of God, the idea that humans are somehow unique and special, it leads to a loss of meaning. We lose sight of why history matters, we question what it even means to be a person, and ultimately we're left with no real foundation for morality.
Yeah. And that story he tells about the prisoner in the Nazi concentration camp, it's chilling. He uses it to illustrate this point that without God, morality becomes just a matter of convenience, It's something we stick to when things are normal, but when our survival is at stake, when we're under pressure, well, all bets are off. It's like morality becomes this flimsy thing that we can just discard when it's no longer convenient.
Right. And then the author brings Gray's critique back to the church and challenges us to really consider, okay, how much do we rely on God? And how much do we rely on ourselves and our own human efforts?
Yeah.
Have we, without realizing it, adopted this kind of secular humanism in disguise?
Yeah. And he shares that story about the Chinese underground church leader. And it's a powerful reminder, isn't it? This leader says, it is amazing how much you can do without God. And it really makes you think about all the ways that we try to do things in our own strength rather than really depending on God.
It does. Yeah. And it connects so well with what Professor Avner Offer says in his book, The Challenge of Affluence. He points out that the same values that lead to wealth, things like hard work, self-control, prudence, those can be undermined by the very things that wealth makes possible, indulgence, instant gratification, this constant desire for more.
Yeah.
And the question that the author throws out there is a tough one. Where is the church that denies itself?
Yeah. Which brings us to the heart of the matter, doesn't it? This connection between our doubts and this idea of convenience. It's like if we don't really have this deep conviction in the truth of the gospel, then maybe we start treating our faith like something we use, like a tool for personal benefit or, to fit in socially. It's that marriage of convenience that the author talks about. And it raises this uncomfortable question. Has your faith become something that you only rely on when it's easy, when it's convenient? Just like Gray suggests that morality functions in a secular worldview.
Exactly. And this leads us into this idea of a mission like no other, right? The author is really emphasizing that if we truly know the truth of the gospel, it should free us from fear. It should liberate us. But he contrasts this idea with how things have kind of played out in Western culture.
Yeah.
We've got this Protestant work ethic that in some ways has led to prosperity.
Right.
But it's also given rise to this incredibly narcissistic, self-absorbed culture that's really detached from the true demands of the gospel.
Yeah. And the analogy he uses about trying to run a marathon in heavy, indulgent clothing, it's so striking, isn't it?
It is. It's like we're so weighed down by the comforts and distractions of this world that we're actually hindering our ability to run the race that's set before us.
Yeah. And then he tells that story about the former covert operative who tried to transition into Christian mission work. And his observation about the lack of commitment, this unwillingness to suffer that he sees in the church compared to what he experienced in his previous line of work, it's pretty eye-opening.
It is. It really makes you stop and think about, okay, how serious are we about this?
Right. But the author doesn't leave us there feeling defeated or discouraged. He points us to what he calls Christ-giving courage.
Right.
And this is key. This isn't something that we have to drum up on our own. It comes from God.
Yeah.
Like Hebrews 11:34 says, we're made strong out of weakness. It's in our weakness that God's strength is made perfect.
Right. And this kind of courage, it's different from the courage that the world talks about.
Yeah.
You know, the world celebrates bravery in the face of the unknown. But Christian courage, it's rooted in the certainty of Christ's victory. Even when we're facing suffering, we have this unshakable hope in something better to come, in the resurrection. Like it says in Hebrews 11:35, some were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain a better resurrection.
Right.
It's this unwavering trust that God is in control, even when things are difficult, even when we don't understand.
Yeah. And that final story that the author shares, the one about the hostile man who describes hearing the gospel as watching flowers grow in a barren field. It's just beautiful, isn't it?
It is. It's like this reminder that the gospel has this incredible power to transform even the hardest hearts.
Yeah. And that when we step into that mission that God has given us, well, there's this huge potential for things to happen that we could never even imagine. Ultimately, the author concludes that by not embracing this mission, we risk losing everything.
Right.
But by stepping into it wholeheartedly, we have everything to gain. So I'd like to leave you with this. As you think about what we've talked about today, this idea of Christian faith, courage, and the mission, ask yourself, is your faith marked by that deep, unwavering conviction? And are you willing to embrace the costs that come with following Jesus? Or has it, maybe without you even realizing it, become more of a marriage of convenience? Something shaped more by the culture around you than by the radical, life-altering demands of the gospel? What would it look like for you to truly live as if the gospel isn't just a set of beliefs that you hold, but a world-changing reality that demands courageous action and complete commitment?
Yeah, those are some really important questions to wrestle with.
Yeah.
I encourage you to really dig into these ideas and maybe even spend some time in the source material itself. See what resonates with you.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another exploration.